everybody. This is Todd Hayen here, and we're going to do another episode of this with a Jordan Peterson clip. And William, how you doing?
Doing all right. A little sniffly, but I'm hanging in there.
Well, you got a disease, huh?
Yeah. Being Canadian in the winter.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a little clip from Jordan, our friend, Dr. Peterson, and we'll get into the talk about it right after we show this. Here it goes. Whoa. Oh, yeah. Jordan. I wonder when this was made, because he looks really different. It was probably like 10 years ago or something. Mm. He gets kind of choked up there. Very passionate man, which is wonderful. And he has some really important points there. So what do you think?
So beautifully said. So articulate.
Yeah.
And you know, you see that and you think, my God, this is what it looks like for a highly intelligent, man who's capable of being, that deeply empathetic. There's this bias that we have where it's like, oh, if you're in your head, you're out of your heart.
Oh yeah.
You know, and it very much in therapy and spiritual circles, this is a kind of world in which there's this funny bias, where if you're in your head, you're out of your heart. And there's this idea that, you kind of hear, usually it's not direct, but it's like, drop out of your head and drop into your heart. Beautiful. Right. And to a large extent, when you're lost in story, I think that's essential. But, I'm always telling my clients, it's not like, you just raise up your heart to meet your head. And
that's a better way to put it. Yeah.
Right? But this is what it looks like. He's speaking articulately. He's making a critical and reasoned case for why it is that men deserve a lot more credit than they appear to be getting because of this hard work that they put in that often goes unnoticed. And he does it in this heart-forward way. And it never ceases to amaze me how people will still come at him and claim, oh, well, you're supportive of incels, and they lump him in with like the Tate brothers and stuff, and they frame him in that way, and you're like, well, but wouldn't that mean that he was like, if he's so toxically masculine, wouldn't that mean that he's like super low in the feminine and therefore like incapable of empathy? And he doesn't. And what's interesting too is that he doesn't just get choked up about men's issues. If you watch more broadly his work, he has just as much empathy for every other kind of person in the women, marginalized members of society. He's perfectly capable of empathy for all those people.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And he's mocked and he's sort of, people take those memes and they'll take his teary eyes and pillory him and make it seem as though they're crocodile tears. How could anyone look at that and think that guy was bullshitting you?
Right.
It's not a man who's putting on a show. That's a man who's speaking from the heart, who's like deeply moved by how much recognition is lacking for these men and how deeply they are deserving of it because the work they do is hard. And it's like, look, women are capable of doing those jobs too, but they generally speaking don't do them. And he's one of the people who
they don't do them. And I don't know if I'd make that statement that they could do them. I think there's a lot of problem with that idea that, well, everything is open to everybody. Everybody can do everything, and maybe everybody can do everything, but not efficiently. And I think more importantly, what you just said, they don't want to do them. And men typically don't want to do the things that women are archetypally more suited for. Again, I'm not saying that women are more suited for anything in particular, but from an archetypal
archetypally or physiologically, you could argue.
Or physiologically, right? Exactly. I don't. Well, that's not true. I won't say that. I was going to say I don't know if the reason why women say or men don't want to do those jobs is for physiological reasons, but it probably is. I mean, obviously, if you're not physiologically ready to like carry heavy weights all day, you won't want to do it. Man or woman. I mean,
he looks at numbers, right? So he goes, whatever women aren't in those professions,
right,
won't, can't, unwilling.
Right.
It doesn't really matter. What he's saying
it doesn't.
That,
it doesn't.
Men are the ones that are doing those jobs, and it almost doesn't really matter why. And look, hey, like because we live in an open and free society, to a large extent, women are free to do those kind of jobs if they want to, and some of them do. And I think that's amazing. If it's what makes you happy, if that's a thing that feels right for you, I think it's great. I think it's tremendous. I mean, especially because, if you think about what's the benefit of a genuinely diverse workplace, not one where diversity is forced upon it, is that there's this feedback loop of learning from people. I'm not a huge fan of homosocial circles. I mean, to a certain extent, they can be kind of interesting and fun, but if I was going to be going to work all day long, I think I'd want a broader spectrum of people to work with, right? Women, older people, younger people. So that bro culture that exists around that, I mean, to a certain extent, I think people, I can see why men kind of like that. But the other benefit, I think, is just that it makes for a better society to live in when we have the freedom, to be open in that way. There's also no reason why women can't. It's look, do the job. If you do it well, great. If you can't, you can't. It doesn't matter whether or not you're male identified, female identified, whatever, male bodied, female bodied. Meritocracy, especially.
I think you're talking. I won't disagree with you, but I think you're talking more about fringe. More about outliers of the bell curve.
Yeah, maybe.
In my opinion, and I have, personally, I have no problem with people that are outliers. I mean, that's what makes the culture interesting and fun, and also educational. We learn a lot from outliers. From people that are doing things that you wouldn't think they would do. I mean, whether it be work or art or anything, literature, whatever. But saying that, I think a lot of the reason why women in the culture has been for the last, 60 years or so, have been going into these non-traditional roles, have chosen to be bricklayers or whatever it might be. I think a lot of that is culturally influenced. I don't think they really want to do those things. I know I'll get attacked for that. But I think if you really get down to it, it's not conscious social pressure. It's not like, oh, I really don't want to be a bricklayer, but the culture is really insisting that I do that. It's certainly not that. But it's more of a sense that I'm missing something if I don't. I'm somehow not really being who I want to be, a free person, if I don't go and try to get work, say, that women typically don't do. And, not just bricklaying, but any of these things, any of these CEOs and, I mean, things that have been traditionally male concentrated kinds of work. It's more like, you can't tell me I can't do that. So I'm going to prove to you I can. And the motivation is more out of how dare you, how dare the culture, or how dare this institution or this man dominated workforce is telling me I can't do this. Now, I know a lot of people say that's naive and that's not, but I mean, if you really think about it, at least the beginnings of this were like that. There is a negative sense of what being a woman is. The culture labels that as negative. Oh, you sit at home all day. You're going to cook for your husband. You're going to raise babies. It's like, that's not romantic. That's like, why would you want to do that? What you would want to do is be the head of a company and, be a boss or maybe even do things that are men focused, like a laborer or whatever. Although that's not really what most women want to do when they get out of the house thing. They want to be CEOs and they want to be lawyers and they want to be those things. There's something much more appealing about that. Just like it's more appealing to be an extrovert than an introvert.
Because it's praised.
It's praised. Exactly. It's a cultural influence. It doesn't. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, like, you're making a great point. Like, and I think one of the things that that's been brought up is how raising children has become this like sort of thankless job. It's like,
Right.
There's no award show for greatest moms. There's no,
Right.
you know what I mean? And meanwhile,
Yeah.
it's the single most important job that any human being could possibly ever do.
That's right.
Interesting hypocrisy too, right? Because it's like, oh, if you suggest that a woman is compelled by cultural influences to be in a male-dominated profession, how dare you?
I know.
Oh, but if feminists say, oh, but women feel compelled to be in domestic roles, but don't really want to, but that's fine. We can speak for them because of course women obviously don't want to be.
Well, because I'm a man and I don't have any right saying what women should want or not.
We did this one.
Now,
meanwhile, women can feel free to tell me anything they want about my lived experience as a man.
That's right. Let me give a little counter to that too, just so I don't look like a total, sexist, misogynist asshole. I think there are obviously a lot of women that take on the non-traditional male role and are really good at it.
Oh yeah.
I mean, like I know in the profession I was involved in for many years in Hollywood, it was right at that time it was trending over to this thing that most of the power producers were female. And I got a dog here, so anybody want to see Jasmine? And they were really good at it. They were constellating a lot of masculine archetypes. Okay, in order to be good at it, they were swimming against the current. Okay, which does have a certain it has a bit of a responsibility to become good at something when you're swimming upstream. You have to be, or you won't survive. So yes, just like you said earlier, I think I don't think the culture should tell people, you can't do this or you can't do that because it doesn't fit your archetypal, pattern or template. But if you do it, you better be conscious of the fact you're swimming upstream, not just culturally, but again, I know you're probably tired of hearing me say the word archetype, but because of the archetypal systems, they're very much like instincts. And if you go against them, there's a price to pay. You have to be conscious. That's really the only price. And you have to compensate for it. Yeah. But you can't get into this, and this is what I think is happening in the culture. You can't get into this place of saying, well, it's my right. It's my right to do this. So fuck you. I don't care what you think. I don't care about traditions and all that. It's like, this is my freedom. This is my right to be this way. It's like, if you concentrate on that, then you're going to miss in my view, the energy behind what's resisting you. It's not the culture so much. It's your own internal archetypal constellations that are actually pulling you back. Yeah. And they want to blame everything else. I mean, just this is a generalization. It's males, it's misogyny, it's patriarchal, it's that's to blame, and that's not really where
it's not physiology and archetypal imprints and
right. Well, the physiological part comes in, but that really is only for labor jobs, and that's not. And this is something that Jordan didn't comment on. He's only commenting on the labor male, the one that goes out and fixes things in the rain and the snow and, keeps the country running, building the buildings and all that. Yeah, he's right. He's right about all that. But what about all the men that don't do that? What about the men that sit in a cubicle and the ones that work themselves to death in order to provide for their family and, are accountants or businessmen, whatever they might be? What about all of them? I mean,
Yeah, and I mean, I think he's bringing up the point about blue collar workers or whatever. I mean, because he's making this point of like you don't really see like he makes that great thing. It's like the lights come on. You don't see the work it takes to do that. And so I think the instincts that he has here are to give voice to the voiceless, to direct our attention toward what we're not seeing.
Yeah, I'm not criticizing him when I say that at
No,
all,
yeah,
because he's I mean, you can't talk about everything in 2 minutes. So,
yeah,
but anyway, it's something I don't think those men should be discounted just because he focused on the laborer. You know, we have to keep that in mind and add that ourselves, or look for another clip of Jordan, because I'm
yeah.
sure he talks about that as well. But it is that taking for granted. It's like taking away this taking for granted. You turn the light on, or any number of things. You drive on the road or whatever. Do you realize that is something that is a male oriented manifestation? And sure, women can do it if they
Mhm.
want to. Nobody's telling them they can't, and some do, but most don't.
Mhm.
I think if we woke up tomorrow and there were no physically capable men in the world, that it was all left to whoever was left, which are all the women, I don't think it would go very well. Now, you can reverse that and say the same.
Mhm.
If we woke up tomorrow and there were no women, it wouldn't work well. But I don't know if you can say one is more than the other. They kind of balance out. And I
Mhm.
think that's one of the primary things he was going on about, is how dare you talk about toxic masculinity? How dare you do
Yeah,
that?
that's an
A
interesting.
world without men. Yeah.
He doesn't like the word toxic masculinity. I understand completely. I mean, I normally would use the word shadow because I usually speak in Jungian terms. I don't know that I have too big a problem with the word toxic masculinity. I mean, I think anything in its excess is toxic. Poison's in the dose, right?
Yeah, but I don't know if that's the problem. I think the problem is using the word masculine and
Yeah, it's been weaponized. It's like, yeah,
it's saying it is toxic. You use the word masculine, you have to put the toxic in front of it. That anything masculine is toxic. And
yeah, and it's a dog whistle for unconscious misandry. It's like, oh, we're gonna
yeah,
shut
right.
now,
Right.
and
Right.
all the misandrous ladies out there sharpen their blades. Um, Interestingly enough, I want to ask you a question. So you and I are in a female dominated profession, and I
Right.
wonder like what your experience has been in that position, because I could easily see people being like, what you guys are talking about this, like, what how could you how do you speak from authority? And it's like, well, I'm in a female dominated profession, and so are you. And,
Do you feel like you're aware of that all the time?
it's funny, I like before I started practicing, it
Yeah.
had been brought to my attention that this was a thing. Oh, didn't you? Oh, you're going to
Yeah.
psychotherapy. Don't you
Yeah.
know that that's a female dominated profession and there's not a lot of men in that? And it kind of crossed my mind, and I thought, it makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
Given that
Right.
women have far easier access to that a kind of
Right.
deep, compassionate like form of empathy. I totally
Hmm.
understand. I certainly find it a lot more easy, or a lot easier, or at least I think I did in the past, to be more emotionally vulnerable with women than with men, right? So I
Hmm.
totally understand. And I think I kind of was bracing myself for a kind of, oh, well, you'll just get fewer clients, or you'll get different kinds of work, but in my experience, two things happened. Number one, I think I got a lot of clients who were like, "Oh, I'm looking for a male therapist because there's not that many."
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
there are. We should be clear. I don't even know what the balance is. So,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
if it's now the case that it's more balanced, like 50-50.
I don't think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, my experience was just that, like, it was sort of appreciated because a lot of people are actually looking
Hmm.
for male therapists for a variety of issues. I think mostly because to work through father issues, it's essential to work with a male therapist, at least for a certain point of your journey. Um, but no, well, one thing I did notice though was that I would often find myself in female dominated spaces, in workshops, in
Well,
groups,
that's where
in
you notice
gatherings
it.
where you really
Yeah.
noticed it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm a bit of an outlier, because for me in that situation, I'm like, oh, I feel perfectly at home, because
Hmm.
most of my life, most of my friend group has been dominated by women, and I'm very
Hmm.
comfortable in women, focused
Hmm.
spaces. It Not only does it not bother me, I kind of like it.
Hmm.
It feels good. It feels like I get to soak up all that blessed feminine energy and really be in that space. And especially like, I've done workshops that was, a room full of like women in their 60s and 70s, and I'm just like, it's like I have such fucking gratitude for that energy.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a, it's not alien to me, but it's like it's something that's like, it's really hard for me to be in that space, and
It's hard for you to be in that space,
to embody that myself.
right?
Yeah. So being in there, I feel like I'm giving this gift of like it's like a kind of contact high of doing that, and I always feel like I come away from that having it sort of rubbed off on me a little bit, and for a few days afterward, I'm a little bit more compassionate, I'm a little bit more embodied, I'm a little bit more open in that, crone feminine way, So yeah, I have really deep appreciation for it. So for me, it's been, I guess, nothing but positive. But I'm curious to know if you have the same experience.
I think I have a very similar experience. At least I did it first. I think I've come into a place where I'm a little bit more what's the word, appreciative of my difference. I do think that men and women in therapy have strong points that I think are based on their sex, whether they're female or male. I'm not saying that you can't have a woman that has the same strong points as a man or vice versa. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying in general, in a bell curve kind of way. I think that a lot of the men that I've seen that talk about therapy and have been in therapy with women will say that this is better for them. Now, not every one of them says that. The topic doesn't come up. So the ones that do say it, they're not necessarily the majority. Okay. I'm not like making a comment like men are better therapists for men, because that isn't true. There are a lot of women that if men have a lot of men that have mother issues, that have certain feminine issues, they will get a lot from the female therapist that they would not necessarily get from the male therapist. But the place that you see the dominance of, if there is an imbalance, which I think there is more in policy and more in regulation and ethics and things like that. I think that's where you see the problem more, if there is a problem. If you're seeing a problem with it, I think you see it more in that context, because obviously if they are the majority, they're going to have more influence in things like policy and ethics and whatever, because they're the majority. So they're going to see it that way. I don't think they're trying to pull anything. I don't think they're trying to be more powerful because they're women or whatever it might be. I just think it just naturally works out that way.
That's interesting. So let me ask you a question. And then maybe I'm going to get you in hot water. As always.
Good. That's always fun.
To what extent do you think that you could attribute the shocking level of dysfunction in the CRPO, the regulatory body in Ontario, to the fact that its policy decisions were made in female dominated spaces? Dangerous question.
I think that's a good question. As much as I think it would be there, I don't really see it.
I can theorize how it could happen.
Yes,
because
definitely.
One of the things that's the trouble with it is that it's like it hides behind this, we're a consumer advocacy protection group, and therefore the practitioner, we don't particularly give a shit. And so far, if you're accused,
they're not supposed to.
Right. And it's a huge problem, because it's like that level of bias, even though you can argue for why that's necessary to protect people from incompetent and malicious practitioners. It's hard to sort of argue against that. But what happens though is that the whole system becomes biased in a way that creates conditions for shocking levels of dysfunction within it.
Oh yeah, sure. Now going back to the male-female thing, I do think that the CRPO leans more toward a leftist paradigm, more toward a leftist worldview, more toward the woke culture, the DEI concepts and whatever. I think they lean more toward that than they would if they were dominated by males. I mean, look at Jordan Peterson and look what he has to say about the whole trans thing. I mean, it's like it's dysphoria, it's psychotic, it's a mental illness. And we're told by the CRPO that we can't advocate or affirm, you know, a biological sex with a client who's claiming they're otherwise. That's a federal law in Canada as well. Yeah. So, you know, is that because the CRPO is mostly made up of women? I don't know. I mean, you know, I think there's a possibility of that, but I certainly can't say.
Well, I mean, I'll make the connection, which is that, right. I mean, to the extent that it's woke. I mean, I don't think that that's the only problem. I mean, I think that's part of it.
No, it's not at all the only problem. But see, that's again where that non-conditional feminine love comes from. It's like people can be whatever they want to be, and we should have no discrimination in the sense of this is better, this is worse. I think those are all very masculine.
Sure,
ideas.
but dark femme, mama bear kind of energy, I think, is partly what's driving the protection. We have to protect the vulnerable,
right,
from the sexual predatory instincts of male practitioners. I think there's an underlying kind of thing of like, what we're really here to do is make sure that male therapists don't rape their female clients and get away with
power dynamic. Right.
And it's interesting that how that, it's unconscious, and there's these people that are all therapists and, probably struggling to recognize the unconscious motivation. But I'll take your point on the woke thing, and I'll say, right. And if you ever want to know what toxic femininity looks like, taken to its ultimate conclusion, it's woke. That's toxic femininity.
Yeah, I think so.
That's shadow, dark, feminine run amok. And that's how fucking dangerous and awful it is. That it has this capacity to bring in like civilization to its knees.
Exactly.
Like people run around talking about the the horrors of patriarchy, and patriarchy in its toxic form is horrendous. But to believe that somehow that there is no female equivalent,
right?
Convincing the devil's greatest trick is to convince the world that he did.
Oh yeah.
And it's this is a taste of it. This is what it looks like.
Yeah.
Yep.
Definitely. Yeah. Now, next week, we're going to talk about Trump. We have a clip about Trump being the king by one of the most brilliant psychologists on the planet.
The most.
You say the most? Okay, I won't argue with that.
Maybe I'll back out because I like Hillman too. I like a lot of people, but Robert Moore
and Todd Hayen is supposed to be pretty brilliant. Yeah. And so is William MP.
Highly ranking.
Yeah,
and I'm going to get in trouble. We're always getting in trouble on the show, Todd. I'm going to get in trouble because people will be like, "Oh, but he was homicidal, suicidal," and
really?
Oh, do you not know the story about how Robert?
No, I don't actually.
I'll spare you. One day when you're older. Anyway, sorry, I'm interrupting. Go ahead. About next week.
No, I was just going to say we're going to be talking about him, and I think that the obvious thing that's coming out with Mr. Trump are things like his dismantling of the DEI and his, the woke viruses, brain viruses Elon Musk talks about and whatever. And this is this kind of anti-shadow feminine that's coming in. And yes, we run the risk of the shadow masculine 100%. as the grandiose king. We run that risk. And I always use the analogy of bringing in the snakes to eat the rats in the chicken coop. Because the rats are eating the eggs. So we got to get rid of the rats. So bring in the snakes and they'll eat the rats. But then when the rats are gone, what's a snake going to eat? It's going to eat the eggs or the chickens, So you run that risk. And we may be taking that risk, and it may be too great of a risk, but we're definitely.
I think it's an inevitability. I think.
Well, it isn't. You're right. You're right.
Not that I want to make proclamations, because I watched a video the other day about 1 million people saying, years ago, how Trump would never be president and how foolish they look. No, but like my proclamation that I'll, go on camera having said is that Trump will go too far. I mean, he probably already is. He'll go too far.
He'll go too far. Okay. 100%. Yeah.
He cannot. Yeah. He's Trump.
No, you're right.
His whole thing is too muchness. And I think
that's his whole thing.
Blitzkrieg that he's on right now. It's all about I'll fucking show you. Hold me back. Watch me. Before there's like every morning you wake up and you're like, oh, he already did that. Not, oh, I'm gonna rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. It's already done. Like, what the fuck? He's moving real quick. Blitzkrieg. It's like it's jaw dropping.
And what usually happens? They go up in flames. I mean, metaphorically, that's the way that over the top, I can do anything I want, goes too far. When it goes too far, the only way to stop it is essentially to explode it. And again, I'm not predicting, obviously, any horrible thing would happen to Trump, because it doesn't have to happen physically. I mean, it can be, again, metaphorically, but it just reminded me speaking of Jordan Peterson, I remember watching an interview of him right at the very beginning when he was becoming very, very popular and very famous. Somebody asked him, what do you fear the most? He says, I fear for the inevitable wipeout, that I'm on this wave and there's no way I'm going to be able to ride this wave for the rest of my life. I'm going to wipe out at some point. And he hasn't yet, but that was his fear. And this is, somebody like Trump doesn't have that fear. Trump believes he can ride that wave as long as he wants to. And I don't think he has the wherewithal and the enlightenment or the intelligence or whatever you want to call it to understand that he's not going to be able to do that. I could be wrong.
Yeah,
maybe he knows.
You're right.
I don't know.
I think you're onto something. I mean, archetypally speaking, when you get into the archetype of the mystic, that kind of interesting blend of the magician and lover, martyrdom is almost a sort of inevitability. The mystic is usually martyred in some way, if not marginalized in the beginning before they're accepted as a mystic or a visionary. But yeah, there's a level of martyrdom there. But it's it's consistent though with Jordan Peterson's recognition of the need to correct the kind of the lack of our ability in the West, maybe even globally now, to be able to sacrifice for the collective. And it's like, even I almost feel like even that famous JFK line, you say that line to people and like they kind of go, oh yeah, I heard that, but like they don't even know what it means.
Which line?
Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. I think people they hear that now and they're like, what?
No, they would today. No one would understand.
Alien, so alien. Yeah. I mean, look, we like that coming sort of midway between World War I, when people literally jumped out of a foxhole and ran into a guaranteed death out of patriotism, to now where it's like, what's in it for me in the military? You're gonna I get a pension and I get this and this. Maybe, okay, sure.
Yeah. Although
he's right in the middle of that Kennedy line literally is smack dab.
Sure it is
in the middle of that transition.
So how do you answer the fact that or what do you say about the fact that the military has seen an increase in what's the word? Gee, I can't even think of a common word. An increase in military signups. In the United States by quite like in the tens of thousands since
recently,
Trump was elected.
Month, since Trump?
No, just recently.
They're getting ready to invade Canada. You didn't hear about that?
That's right. There you go. But isn't this? I mean, going back to what we were talking about a minute ago. I mean, isn't this essentially the way of the universe to maintain balance, to maintain some kind of homeostasis? Where things can go way out of whack. That pendulum can swing way up, but it won't keep going. It will come back. And you look at a phrase like "pride goeth before a fall." You see this pride, say, going back talking about Trump, but this pride in his abilities and his narcissistic pride, whatever you want to call it, will have, and just what Jordan said too, that he's going to eventually wipe out. That you can't maintain that popularity and that sense of whatever. I don't know what this has to do with toxic masculinity, but
Well, I do. I mean, I think you made a good point about how one way of looking at where we're at, and we are in a kind of Cold War between these political factions, but really, I think it's more of a kind of war between the shadow masculine and the shadow feminine. The woke versus MAGA is this kind of battleground. And it's terrifying because it's like these shadow energies that are going to war with each other, right? Yeah, I mean,
why do you think the shadow feminine,
mm,
and maybe I'm wrong saying this, maybe this is a male thing, but why
yeah.
do you think the shadow feminine is so off from what most people, certainly the majority in the United States who voted for Trump, believe is so off of normal, that the shadow masculine is for some reason easier to reconcile as
Mm,
normal? I mean, it may be far to one side of normal, but the idea, say, just to grab one thing, the idea of mutilating children, I'm not even supposed to say that on YouTube. Apparently that's against the rules.
what do you
So I
get
won't say
pulled
that.
down?
If you use the word mutilate when you're talking about trans operations, apparently that's a YouTube rule. So I'm not saying that. Surgery on children to change their sex.
Mm,
Okay, if that's considered by most people as being abnormal, yet coming in and saying there are only two sexes, there's two biological sexes from now on, as the president gives an executive order, seems normal. And the word normal is a stupid word. I think you know what I mean though when I'm using it.
yeah,
Why is the shadow feminine so far off of this track where the
yeah.
shadow masculine is not? I
Hmm.
mean, yeah, you can disagree with it. You can say that, going to war, blowing somebody up or whatever, that's all shadow masculine. Tyrants, Trump being a grandiose narcissist, that's all shadow masculine.
Hmm.
Why is that not as difficult to reconcile as the shadow feminine is in this particular case that we're talking about? Does that make sense? I mean, I could be
I
coming up
think
with
so.
something
I
really
mean, and I'll
stupid
answer your question with, because we live under a patriarchy.
and go further with that.
One of the reasons why the shadow of the feminine, it almost feels like it doesn't exist to most people. It kind of breaks their brain to even consider it. I think theoretically they understand that it should on paper exist, but that it's not. They're not able to really recognize it. It's because we live under patriarchy, and we're living at the tail end of a long period of patriarchy, right? And so we have in our living memory all of the pain and suffering of the abuses of the toxic masculine fresh in our consciousness. So patriarchy is really easy to spot because we've all been burned by it, and we've all been burned by it so long that it's now, we've been through decades now of it being drawn out for healing and reconciliation, and to a certain extent in the shadow, revenge. Just like it's really hard for people to see toxic masculinity if you're living under a matriarchy, because for long enough, because people will be focused on how toxic femininity is causing harm to the people that live under it, right? I think it would be the same thing. Even that, though, I can imagine that for a lot of people it's really hard to wrap your head around, because I think a lot of people, feminist identified included, can't even imagine what it would look or feel like to live under a matriarchy, let alone one that's um, that's in its shadow and malignant and harmful.
Do you think part of it is because the pendulum has swung so far into the patriarchy that in order to pull it back, you've got to really throw some weight on it? So the shadow feminine is what it takes to pull that pendulum back.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that really works though, because it seems to me that it seems to me that the toxic masculinity that the feminine is always trying to tout, to say this is the problem with the culture,
Mm-hmm.
the patriarchy and whatever, is not as unconscionably pathological as what's being proposed in the toxic or the shadow feminine. It doesn't involve, at least as it appears in today. I mean, at one time, I mean, they used to burn women at the stake, and there's, in other countries, they're still doing things like mutilation, to women and whatnot. I mean, I'm not saying that, oh, gee, it's great, everything's fine everywhere. But in the Western culture, in our culture, the culture we deal with, Canada, the United States, the patriarchy doesn't have the same hold as it used to have.
No, it's dying.
Yeah, it doesn't have the same. Why is it that this far left has such toxicity to it?
Yeah, I'm thinking of that great line. I think it's from Kabir, where he says something like, have you noticed how when the pendulum is swinging in one direction, that it's actually gaining momentum to swing the other way?
Oh, that's interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
And, and if you think about Robert Moore and the brilliance of the way that he conceives the system visually, that the triangle with the bipolar opposites and how we're constantly swinging on these bipolar shadow, aspects of the, in the king quadrant, it's the tyrant and the coward. And that was Trump part one and Biden. It was like you have this tyrannical, guy, and then followed by the coward, and there's this sort of obvious pendulum swing.
Right.
And I think these things are happening. Like the alchemists would say, or the hermeticists would say, as without, so within. There's microcosmic, macrocosmic moves in all of this. So I think that's partly, if I'm hearing you correctly, I think that's partly one explanation for why you're seeing what you're seeing in the way that you're seeing it. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Yeah, sure it does. Sure it does. And a lot of the things that I say, I won't speak for you, but a lot of the things I say are not really formulated thoughts, because they're just coming to me now, sitting here talking about it. It's like you and I are just having a conversation, and if I go back and listen to this, I might say something like, that was stupid. Why did I say that? Because some of it's like that. But still, just thinking about this idea that we have a toxic or a shadow feminine, that we've identified things like wokeism and all of the stuff that goes along with that as part of that. What is the equivalent of this stuff that we can look at and say, this is insane? What is the equivalent on the other side that is equivalent to that is insane? On that, the masculine, and this does tie in a little bit with what Jordan was saying about why can't you see this toxic masculinity idea is ridiculous. It's like, I hate that word. Why can't people see that this is the wrong path to go down? To like label men as we don't need them and whatever it might be. Where is it just acts? Is it just acts from the past, with the way that the male world has treated women with the abuse and this.
Collective trauma, right? So
right.
And the collective trauma is that that there's this very selective hypervigilance around toxic masculinity, because it's the thing that triggered the trauma response collectively in everyone. So we're hypervigilant around it. Everyone has these negative experiences of being on the other end of, male violence or sexual violence or whatever. And so it's like, we're all hypervigilant and we're biased. I mean, trauma, from doing trauma work, right? It's like, it's this function within the ego that's absurdly biased. Because I was in a car accident once 10 years ago, I'm never going to go anywhere near anything that even looks or smells or sounds like a car. I mean, that's and that's how the trauma is trying to protect you from never being in a situation where you felt overwhelmed like you did, right? And so I think that's kind of a part of it. It's a collective trauma response.
Yeah, that's good. Let's just go back just for a second, because we do go off into the weeds, which is great. I think it's a good thing that we do that, but just to try to keep some consistency in it. Go back to some of the things that Jordan was saying. You
carry the masculine and I'll carry the feminine. How about that?
What's the feminine?
You keep us on track. And
I'll
bring the openness and the juiciness. And
I'm doing that too. I mean, I think that's part of our theme here is to.
Wouldn't it be great if someone was to like psychoanalyze the masculine feminine dynamics of you and I as we navigate these topics? Oh, look,
why not?
Holding the masculine. Oh,
that'd be fun.
There's William and his feminine being all in flow and openness and loose, and you're trying to bring us back into, the teleological. We got to get somewhere, William. Let's go.
I certainly think personally that you present more of a masculine presentation, not necessarily here, but just I know you, than I do.
Because I have a beard?
Well, I do too. You didn't notice?
I mean, I'm kind of halfway joking because I'm like, I don't feel that I'm dominant in masculine energy. So anytime people tell me that that they perceive me that way, it jars my sort of brain a little bit.
Yeah, I've dropped that. Because yeah, I don't. In thinking about it, this is one of those things that thinking about. No, you don't. But there's a strength in you in what you say. There's an intellectual dominance to me, but there's also a lot of heart as well. So I don't know if I'd use the word dominance. In comparing to me, that's really what I'm saying. I'm not so much saying that you have a dominance of the feminine or whatever, or even the intellect, but the intellect is very masculine. But anyway, whatever.
Well, no,
just
thank you for the compliment. I appreciate it. I'll give you
well, it's meant that way.
My mother used to say, she goes, the problem with you is that you win arguments you shouldn't. I was like, oh, busted. You got me.
That's really good. Right? That's interesting. Are we going to do a therapy session?
Why is a woman? Sure, we can.
What is a what is a woman?
I said, why is a woman, my mother?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Right.
She got me dead to rights on that one. I definitely win arguments. I should.
That's a good one. That's a good one, especially for mom to say to you. That's really great. That's really great. Yeah. But again, going back, I want to hear what you have to say about what I said earlier about the idea. And again, I'm not faulting Jordan for saying this because he's, it's just one little clip and he had that on his mind. But where is the masculine and where is it compromised by the culture in areas that are not like laborers and workers that go out and climb telephone poles and whatever? Because the majority of men probably doesn't fit in that class. So what is that? What is the masculine? Let's just say, rather than get too complicated, because if I said, what about the artist? We're talking about kind of a constellation of more feminine archetypes than masculine, maybe in some ways, but maybe not. You've got, if you consider the magician and the lover as prominent masculine archetypes, you may have more of a constellation of that in an artist than you do the warrior and the king.
Yeah.
All right. Because the leadership of the king and the warrior, the physical, I mean, the warrior shows up more in a bricklayer than, say, an artist or a musician.
Maybe.
You don't think so?
No.
There's not a warrior in manipulating matter. That to me is
artists manipulate matter.
Well, not in the same way. They don't manipulate it with physical strength. It's a stretch. I'm not making a big argument for it, but I think a bricklayer or a construction worker is constellating more of the warrior than he is of the lover. Okay. I think there's certainly some magician in there. All right. Because you're transforming matter into something else. That's what an artist does. All right. But it's more physical. It's more dependent on your physique, on your body. And I think warriors, that's one of the primary focuses of the warrior is the body. None of the other ones require the body the same way that the warrior does. The warrior is dependent on the physical body. So anyway, that's the only reason why I relate those two.
It's a yin yang thing, right? I'm going to answer a question that you didn't ask.
Yeah.
The bricklayer versus the artist, right? If I work with a huge number of artists in my practice. At one point, it was like 70% of the people I was working with were working artists. Men, it's like they are constantly navigating warrior energy. The
artist.
Oh my God, yeah. Okay. Because you have to. The magician conceives, of this brilliant thing that needs to be executed, right? And for the most part, it's true warrior. It's a true warrior energy because it's in alignment to this this transpersonal sovereign king of the work. They don't work for somebody. That's bricklayers are more like soldiers than warriors, and soldiers aren't archetypal. They constellate warrior energy, but they're very different, right? Because they're working for somebody. They were given the plan. And their negotiation of warrior energy is, how do I stay focused? And it requires them also, by the way, to bring in heart, because if you don't love what you do, you're going to exhaust yourself, right? And the best bricklayers are the ones who love it. Those who are in bricklaying and don't love it won't be in bricklaying for very long.
But wouldn't you say that about anything?
Yes,
the best artist loves it. The best warrior loves it. The best bricklayer loves it. Yeah, it's passion. It's expression of passion. Now, what we're doing?
I was making, I'll just finish what I was saying.
Yeah. Go ahead.
What you are looking for here is, because you're thinking about things on one simple plane of a binary, masculine and feminine, but you have to bring in a different one more axis, right? Because the minute you bring in that, then it makes sense. Like, is it masculine or it's feminine? Well, if you add this other one, light and dark, then it becomes more dynamic. And then you can even go into further dimensions. But the yin yang is a way to conceive.
Well, that's a really good point. I'm not going to question that, but I don't think I was doing anything with the masculine and feminine. I was more talking about masculine archetypes,
right?
And where the activity of a male as an artist, right, or as a CEO, or as an accountant or whatever, what archetypal constellations are more prominent in those different professions. This is an academic argument. I mean, it's like, it doesn't really mean anything. I think the problem with trying to talk about this way is along the lines of what you're just saying, is that you can't really extract. You might be able to say that the man that goes out with a sword and starts hacking at the enemy, or at somebody breaking into his house or whatever, is more purely warrior archetype energy than one that doesn't. You don't agree with that?
No, then you're not no. If you've gone berserk, you're not a warrior.
No, I'm not saying berserk. I'm just, I made it sound like that, but I'm not. I'm just talking about, I do think there's some activities that are more one or the other of these archetypes than others. Okay. But I don't think you can fully extract it like I was essentially doing.
You can't. I mean, when you do, that's when you get shadow. When you get warrior with zero lover, you get, and zero king, you get berserk.
Exactly. Yes.
And that to the extent then that you're no longer constellating the warrior archetype in its fullness, because you're not driven by being in alignment to the transpersonal other of the king. You're not taking orders from the divine at that point. Right. You've gone berserk and you've broken from that, and so now you're in its shadow form. Because you lost all of the lover. The heart had to close in order to protect you from some trauma, and then that popped you into archetypal possession, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's one reason, I think, and I could be wrong with this because I'm not a scholar in this area at all, but the idea of the pantheons, say the Greek pantheons and the Roman pantheons and whatever, are these gods that represent these archetypal energies are pure. That's why they're constantly having conflict with one another, because they're not integrated. They're not rounded out. The Zeus and the whatever Mercury, whatever the different Hermes, whatever the different gods are, they're more of a pure representation of a particular archetypal energy. And that's why they're always in conflict with one another, because they're not integrated. They're not rounded out. And most humans, unless they're having issues and having problems, are not individuated. They have an excess of one thing or another going on at any particular time. They don't have a balance. They don't have a conscious integration of the archetypes. And that's what I think one of the primary issues are in psychology and psychotherapy, is working with people that seem imbalanced and seem non-integrated. A lot of that can come from complexes. A lot of it can come from systems of avoiding trauma, avoiding unsafe situations will cause you to become more one thing than another and not integrated. And that's I feel the focus of my work. And I think a lot of what you've talked about is to look for that way of integration, whatever that might be. I mean, there's a variety of ways to self-integrate or to self-individuate or self-actualize, you know.
We could probably do a whole episode on, Jean Shinola Bolen and how.
Oh yeah.
the Greek gods are not actually archetypes, and she's amazing, and I love her work, and I think it's really important. But part of the problem is that no one knows Greek gods, and they're not archetypes. So a lot of the time, trying to use that work practically with clients, it just gets lost, and it's bit of it complicates things that are already complicated. I actually don't think that it's because these things constellate pure archetypal energy. I think it's because the Greeks are trying to understand these clusterings of archetypal dynamics through personified gods. I think it was their way of grappling with it, but it's
there's really no way to have a being that looks human or whatever it might be to be a pure archetypal representation. I mean, that's not possible to do. So, I'll step back a little bit I didn't mean to imply that the gods were representations of archetypes. I think that they have a stronger imbalance than most. I don't know who's written about that and said that's not true. That's fine, because it's just my thought.
What's interesting too, Jean Chanel Poland she's very much onto something, because I think that the Greek gods did for the Greeks what cinema does for us. It's like we watch cinema that's loaded with all these archetypal energy, and we kind of get it through these, inflected through these characters who we understand and relate to, these types. I recognize this kind of man.
That's exactly what it is. You're exactly right.
Doing. They had myth and theater. We have cinema, and we understand it. And
that's actually
ours is Brad Pitt and Tom Cruise and whatever.
Right. I appreciate you saying that, because I think that's a better way to look at it. That if you look at a movie, or you look at a TV series or whatever, if everybody were integrated and fully whole, it would be a bore.
There'd be no
would be like there wouldn't, and you wouldn't be able to relate to it in a pure form. I mean, you look at a series like Breaking Bad, there's probably no more presentation of archetypal imbalances with the characters than in a series like that. Is hugely popular because of that, and that's
totally.
We can
you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
I think the success of Breaking Bad was it was one of the first shows that ever took a good guy and turned him into a bad guy.
Yeah, right.
And actually showed you the process of how archetypal possession actually occurs.
Right.
Yeah. And it's done over this this slow burn of him disintegrating out of this magician in its wholeness, this lover, this family man, this teacher, who cares so deeply and is frustrated, to devolve into the whatever you want to say is Walter White in the end. It's brilliant, and it's also an interesting meditation on the Nietzschean concepts of will to power and these kind of things. But the best thing about it is that you don't need to know any of that to receive the medicine that is embedded in that work, which is why I think it's very much like what I imagine, similarly to what it would be like to experience walking out of the Oresteia in Athens. And I mean, one of the things that I've heard people claim is that there was such a collective unity, a kind of everyone lived under this collective myth so deeply and so profoundly that the theater had such an impact on the people when they went to it that we can't even understand. We can't even even imagine what it would be like to be impacted that deeply by being there and experiencing that, because we're so fragmented now. It's kind of the medicine within the theater and our cinema is watered down. So anyway, another topic.
No, that was really great. Yeah, I loved it that you tied those two together for me.
Dot connector.
Well, I mean, because that's exactly right. And I think my point, if it was understandable at all, is just from a theater perspective, the gods represented certain imbalances in the archetypal possessions and whatever it might be. And not that each one of them represented an archetype, obviously, but whatever. So
we should the jealous father in Zeus.
Right. And there are combinations of things, not like one. And tying that in with today's cinema, whether it be television or movies or whatever, the good ones, at least. I mean, if you ever hear any of Jordan, speaking of Jordan, we'll close with talking about Jordan. Jordan's lectures at U of T on the different animated films like Lion King or whatever are brilliant. They're brilliant. And anybody that wants to have access to understanding the different archetypal powers is to watch those and really see how he explains and how he shows archetypally how these characters develop and whatever is brilliant.
Yeah, just check your ego at the door. You know, it's like,
yeah, I know,
because what the tragedy of Jordan Peterson, and I mean, you could make the argument that he's like greatly to blame, but that people, because of the bias they have, because of the projections that he courts, they miss, you know, the brilliance that he has to offer, right? Oh, I would never watch a Jordan Peterson thing because he's transphobic. And it's like, yeah, but if you watched it without that bias, without your ego getting in the way, you might learn a thing or two, you know?
Oh my God. Yeah. I had a potential client once. I think I told you this, that wrote to me because I have a clip on my website of Jordan. This was before he was famous. So he wasn't even talking about the political controversies. He was talking, I think the lecture was on the Lion King or something. And it was just starting to come into this whole political thing with U of T and the pronoun stuff and all of that. And this guy wrote to me, he said, you know, I've decided not to come see you because I see you have a video clip on your website about Jordan Peterson. And that would really bother me. And I'm like, oh, you know, man, you really should go to therapy, whether it be me or somebody else, you know. He got some stuff going on there. And I'm not saying everybody should love Jordan Peterson by any means, but he is a very brilliant man. And he has things to say that everybody can benefit from. Some things, no, fine. But, you know, he's not perfect. But,
yeah, it's so funny that, you know, somehow very simple ideas like fragility is not a virtue seems to be something that people have completely dissociated.
Oh, I know.
It's like it's almost like it's a form of virtue signaling how fragile you are. Oh, I care so much about trans people that I'm not going to go anywhere near anything that or anybody that goes near Jordan Peterson. What? I mean, there's cases to be made that Jordan Peterson isn't even particularly transphobic. I mean, I completely understand that people who are trans hear what he says and are terrified and are offended because they're pathologizing. He's pathologizing their lived experience. I hear completely why. But my point would be, yeah, but what if you could feel that feeling and still listen to what he had to say, rather than just dismiss him out of hand and say, because you have that attitude, I'm walking away from any potential thing that you have to say. It's you know, the other point to make about that is that I don't think Jordan Peterson is pathologizing. What you didn't use the word pathologizing. What word did you use? You said transphobic. But you said something else. I don't think Jordan. I did say pathologizing because and correct me if I'm wrong. And God, I hate to be wrong about this, but I do actually believe that Jordan Peterson's position is that the trans experience is fundamentally pathological.
I do too. No, I agree.
Is he on record as having said that?
Probably. You know, the word pathology people generally don't understand anyway, including myself.
I think it's an illness.
Yeah, right.
It's not legitimate.
Okay.
It's not a legitimate
deviation of normalcy.
Sure.
Okay, which is an illness. Now we can argue about that forever. Okay, what is normal? I don't think, and I could be wrong, but I don't think Jordan has a problem with any of that pathology. He's a psychologist. He works with pathology. I think his problem is with the culture. I think his anger and his phobic sense is not toward trans people. I don't think he'd have any problem sitting with a trans person and being really empathic.
Because he sits with people that are, I mean, look, you're making a great point. Like, let's say that it's true, hypothetically, and probably is, that Jordan Peterson believes that there's no such thing as a trans experience that's not pathological. My follow-up would be like, what, so what? But so he believes that it's coming from pathology. It doesn't mean that he doesn't have compassion or love for you or wishes ill upon you or wants to strip you of your rights. I mean, the one thing I think he stands behind is that he is opposed to gender-affirming care and for transitioning hormone like HRT and surgery for minors.
That's the culture.
With him on that, and
that's the culture. That's not the person.
Exactly.
That's the culture.
Yeah.
And 100%. And I think people conflate those two. They're confused about, oh, he hates trans people. That's what he's angry about. I don't think he's angry with the trans person. He's angry with the culture that's
totally.
telling us we have to,
Confusing.
and it's confusing. It's all of those things. Yeah.
This is the thing, you know, you said it earlier and I was sort of tempted to jump in because I was like, you know, oh, Trump said that about there being only two genders. And I'm like, right. And the problem is that he's just a little bit wrong in that there's only two sexes, technically three, because intersex to a very small percentage. I mean, it's in the middle. But the conflation, do you know how many people I witness who will conflate transgenderism, transsexuality, transvestitism, you know, autogynephilia, homosexuality, and they don't even, and if you can't break it down, of course, the whole thing looks even more crazy. And this is also, by the way, another interesting point. You're taking this very fringe, radical thing that existed in the counterculture and shoving it in to the dominant culture. And the dominant culture is going like, what the fuck is this? Right? Because we're talking about something that is in the counterculture, right? And I actually believe, and this goes back to Heidegger, feel free to, you know, say I quoted a Nazi. He has this idea that the counterculture has a sacred function to speak truth to the dominant culture, and that they need to be separate. And if the dominant culture swallows the counterculture, that's when you get tyranny and autocracy, because there's nothing to push back. And so this idea of taking this fringe thing and trying to shove it into the counterculture, into the dominant culture, is you risk tyranny. And isn't that the whole point that everyone's terrified of? Wait, you're gonna now create conditions under which you're taking away people's rights. You don't have a right to say no when a person demands that you gender them in a certain way.
Yeah, but look, there's also there's some important things to say about that. One is that he should not have used the word gender. Right. Because if you look up the definition of gender is basically a subjective identification of a sex. Yeah, he should say there's two sexes. All right. And yeah, okay, there's 0.012 or whatever that people are born with a mixture of the two and they don't know what the fuck it is. Okay. So the other thing to say is that his proclamation or his executive order is not saying people can't think they are another gender. He's talking about the government. He's talking about laws and actions and, you know, political legislation and whatever, that it will not recognize more than male, female. And people get all that all fucked up too. It also has nothing at all to do with homosexuality. Nothing. I mean, a homosexual male is not going to say, I'm a woman, I have a penis, I'm a male. Right. They don't have a problem with that.
If there could be one bit of clarity where people understand that we're talking about self-identification.
Right.
Okay. So you can if self-identification cannot then be translated into rights. You can't do that. You can't cross that boundary, because then you get into the craziness of, like, you know, a male sex offender who's being, you know, going to be put into a male prison population, who's going to be probably killed and tortured, suddenly goes, oh, now identify as a woman, and they're going to put him in with a population where he can dominate them physically and probably, inflict his predatory instincts upon them. That's all about self-identification. Now, the bathroom issue too. I mean, intersex people are of no threat. Transsexual people who have transitioned, who had bottom surgery, right? It's a whole different thing. And if you do HRT, right? I mean, but we conflate these whole things, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, you know, we're allowing men with penises into women's safe spaces." Well, what about people who are self-identified as female and don't have penises?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a difference, because you can actually make the difference. You can say this person has had surgery, this person has transitioned, versus this person self-identifies. Anyway, we'll get lost in those weeds if we.
I know, that's a good one though. I hear you. Okay, everybody, we're gonna leave for a week, and we will be back. So all of you subscribers out there, check in and leave comments. Please leave comments, because we want much more of that. Those of you who are not subscribed, please subscribe, so that we have you on record that you're interested in this, so we can know how to proceed in the future. And any questions, any suggestions, if you have a topic you want us to yak on about, we will be happy to consider it. Please leave it in the comments. We read all the comments, by the way, and we tend to want to, or we do try to respond to all of them. So, you know, if you want to come in and see me as a client for therapy, you know, that's my website, and Williams is on his thing too. And you know, that's probably the best way to go about doing it. If you're interested, I'm not going to spend any time going into email addresses and whatever. So we'll just leave it at that. So I will see you next week, and I'll let William tell you if he's going to see you next week.
See you next week. Hopefully we'll be talking about Trump as king in the eyes of the great Robert Moore.
Yes, let's definitely do that.
Is no, you know, not predicated on the fact that he's a murderer.
Who? Robert Moore's a murderer?
I'll tell you the story when you're older.
Okay. Oh, that's a new one. Anyone just interested in more of the archetypal stuff we talk about, you should check out Robert Moore's lectures
100%.
online. They're absolutely brilliant. So, okay, everybody. See you later. Take care. Have a good week.